So let's talk about the Book of Revelation. I mean, for centuries, it's crazy imagery. We're talking beasts, angels, huge cosmic battles. It's fascinated people, and yeah, it's terrified them too. Most folks think of it as this prophetic roadmap to the end of the world. But what if it's not that at all? What if it's something else entirely? All right, let's really get into this. And we're going to start with a pretty big question. What if Revelation isn't actually a literal prediction of what's going to happen in the future? What if it's actually this incredibly complex, symbolic story that's pointing to something that has already happened? So, in this explainer, we're going to unpack a really specific way of looking at it, a literary interpretation that comes from our source material. And this idea completely reframes the entire book. It suggests it's not prophecy, but actually a really powerful kind of storytelling called an allegory. Okay, so to even begin to get our heads around this idea, we've got to understand the one key concept that basically unlocks the whole thing. So, first things first, what is an allegory? Well, according to the source we're looking at, an allegory is kind of like a two-layer cake. On the top layer, the surface, you've got a fictional story. And it always takes place in some kind of non-literal, otherworldly place. Like a magical land, a spiritual realm, or maybe even a dream. But that's just the surface. The real point is hidden underneath. It's a deeper meaning that connects to actual people, real events, or big ideas from our world. And, it's really important to see how this is different from, say, a parable. That distinction is totally key. See, a parable, like a lot of the stories Jesus told, is set right here in our normal, everyday world. But an allegory, that happens somewhere fantastical, somewhere else. A great example is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. That's seen as an allegory because the whole thing goes down in the spiritual world, not here on earth. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This whole story within a story thing sounds a little complicated, but honestly, it's a storytelling trick you're probably already super familiar with. Let's just look at a few famous examples, and I promise it'll all click into place. Okay, so think about George Orwell's Animal Farm. On the surface, it's a story about talking animals on a farm, right? But the hidden meaning? I mean, come on, it's clearly about the Russian Revolution. Or how about C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? The kid's adventure in Narnia is a really powerful allegory for the Christian gospel story. You see the pattern here? In every case, you have this fictional, fantastical surface that's pointing to something deep and real from our own world. All right, so let's take this idea, this allegorical lens, and apply it to the Book of Revelation. The source we're using argues that its setting, this wild apocalyptic vision, is that otherworldly realm we've been talking about. So if that's the case, what do we find underneath? Well, according to this interpretation, all that absolutely wild imagery, the seven-headed beasts, the angels pouring out bowls of God's wrath, all the cosmic destruction, all of that stuff is the surface fiction. It's the big, flashy, otherworldly story that's meant to grab you and pull you in. Which, of course, leads us to the million-dollar question, right? If all those visions are just the fictional layer on top, what's the hidden real-world story that the author, John, was actually trying to tell? This is the core idea, the big reveal of this entire interpretation. Believe it or not, the source argues that the entire incredibly complex book, with all of its insane symbolism, is one giant meta-narrative for the Easter story. Yeah, not the end of the world, but the culmination of Jesus' first coming, his death, his resurrection, and his ultimate victory over evil. Okay, let's pause for a second. The idea that Revelation is basically fiction, pointing to a hidden truth, that's a challenging thought. It's a pretty controversial take, and it's one that a lot of people have frankly shied away from for centuries. So let's really dig into the implications of looking at the book this way. So you might be asking yourself, okay, it's an allegory, why didn't John just come out and say it? Well, the source argues that an author of an allegory doesn't have to. The whole point is to give even more power and emphasis to that hidden message. And for the original audience, that message, the Easter story, would have been totally self-evident. They were completely immersed in its importance. But, and this is a really crucial point, this doesn't mean there's some simple decoder in you can use to figure it all out. It's not a one-to-one code. The source really emphasizes that Revelation is an incredibly complex, really sophisticated allegory. The symbols in it can have multiple layers of meaning, all at the same time. And we see a perfect example of this right in the text itself. Check this out. In chapter 17, the 7 heads of the beast are actually defined in 2 different ways. First, John says they are 7 hills, which everyone at the time would have known meant Rome. But then, in the very next verse, he says there are also 7 kings. See? This shows us the symbols aren't just rigid little puzzle pieces. They're fluid, they're multi-layered. So if we start thinking of Revelation this way, as an allegory for the Easter story instead of a literal roadmap to the future, it just opens up a whole new set of questions, doesn't it? The focus completely shifts. It's no longer about when is all this scary stuff going to happen. Instead, it becomes, what does this incredible story of cosmic victory mean for us right here, right now? It could actually transform the book from something that makes us afraid of the future into a really deep reflection on the most central event of the Christian faith.